Okay, so this is the solution to the exercise for day 8. We had a couple of tasks. I just want to jump right into it. First thing we need to do is create 2 stored procedures. I hope you saw this note here about how to create stored procedures and test them within the Visual C# 2010 Express Edition IDE. Didn't really demonstrate that at any point, so hopefully you saw that note and you're able to follow that part along. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the Database Explorer and go down to Stored Procedures. And notice we have no stored procedures. I'm also going to open up tables for reference sake. I'm going to right click and select Add New Stored Procedure, and I'm going to just delete out a bunch of stuff here. Alright, so the first thing that I was charged with doing was creating a stored procedure that, given a country code, a 2-character country code, it would return back to me all of the incidents within a given within the database. And we wanted some specific fields of information: the ID, the first and last name of the agent who registered this incident. Also looking at that incident type name from our lookup table called incident type. So we were going to pull from all 3 tables. Let's go ahead and start composing a stored procedure called get incidents by country. Okay, now I know I'm going to pass in the country code. Now, if at any point I get confused about what the what parameters I should be using, what their values are, for example, what is the data type and the size, I can select on it here and then look up in my properties window that this is an nchar 2, size 2. So we're going to go nchar 2. Okay, so that's our input parameter. Now we need to create a select statement. And so I might start kind of just easily here and grow it. I'm going to give it an alias because I know I'm going to be using all 3 tables. Alright, so now if I were to just save this part, see if it works, and I'm going to execute the stored procedure. We'll give it US and click OK, and I get back rows, which is awesome. But this isn't exactly how this is supposed to work. What I need is the incident ID and the country. But I also need to do a join here on agent to get the first and last name of the agent. And I happen to know that if I were to look at both the agent and incident tables, that there's a foreign key relationship between the 2 on agent ID. So I can make that work. So I'll go first name, last name. Alright, so now let me save this and then run the stored procedure again. Make sure that part works. And again, that seems to work. If I scroll all the way over, I do get first and last name. Awesome. All right, but there's a final field of information that I need to pull back, and that is the incident type. So I'm going to do another inner join, incident type, and I'll just do IT on I dot, incident type ID equals IT dot incident type ID. Again, I can verify this by looking at the relationship there. And finally, I want the incident type name. Now, hopefully, that I made that change, I'll be able to execute this again. And I get incident type name, last name, first name, country, going backwards here, and the incident ID. So I think that that fulfills our first requirement. I think I'm done with that stored procedure. The second stored procedure I was asked to build, that I'm supposed to build, is to insert a new incident into the database. So here again, I'm going to right click, select Add New Stored Procedure. I'm going to delete out the stuff I know I don't need. And I'm going to name this Insert Incident. And so I'm going to focus primarily on this incident table. And therefore, I'm going to need country, we already know that's an N char 2. Incident type ID, happen to know that that's a tiny int. So we'll go. Then I need an agent ID, and I happen to know that that's an integer by looking at the properties window, and an incident date, and looking here, small date time. Okay. All right, why am I not going to include the incident ID? Because if we look at the definition, this is an identity column, as identity equals true, so it will automatically create the value for that field based on what's already in our table. Okay, now it's a simple insert statement. So insert incident country incident ID, or type ID, agent ID, incident date, values, country, incident type ID, agent ID, and incident date. All right, so let's save that. Whoops, so we have a few problems. Must declare scalar value country at country. All right, so clearly I've done something incorrect here. Oh, pretty dumb of me. There we go. Forgot the commas in between all the input parameter arguments. Okay, there we go. All right, so now let's go ahead and execute this. And let's put a new one in the US. Do a 1, agent ID of 1, and then a small date time. Let's just go 7/1/2010 and click OK. And it says 1 row affected, 0 rows returned. Let's make sure that this works by going to the incident and table, and we're going to show table data and scroll down to the very last one, and you can see I do have an incident type ID of 1, agent ID of 1 in the US, and it was on 7/1/2010. So that's probably the one that I created. That one probably works. Okay, so the first part of this is complete. I built my stored procedures and they seem to work. Great. So the next part of this is to set up the menuing system. And recall that I gave some indication that this is more of a logic exercise than it is a user interface exercise, and I really meant that. So I'm going to do a lot of typing, and you may want to fast forward. I'll give you the time indicator when we get the menu working so you can look at the final solution if you don't want to watch me type. Here we go. All right, we've got enough to test this now to see if the basic structure of the menu works. All right, sort of works. I saw it work briefly. Okay, so the next part then is each of these first two cases that represent incident by country and report new incident, I'm going to farm them out to their own methods. Okay, so hopefully I've got enough here where I can test the basic menuing structure. I haven't done any really important work just yet. Let's test the one incidents by country. Well, I don't see anything here, so let's check into why that would have come about. It would help if I did this. Let's go ahead and replace that with that. And then we'll replace this with There we go. That should work a little bit better. All right, so nothing really happens when we select these options, but the whole basic thing works. And just to kind of explain what's going on here, so it all started with a looping structure, this while loop. And I'm going to continue to loop through and display the main menu as long as we don't hit a value equal false condition. When that happens, so while I said while value, that's implying while value equals true. It's the same as this, right? I just did that. So while the value is true, continue displaying the menu. If at any point display menu returns false, like it does whenever somebody selects exit number 3, then it'll return false and will exit out of this loop, and the application will exit out of main, which means the application is finished. All right, there is one condition here that I see I've overlooked, and that is this default condition. When somebody types in something other than 1, 2, or 3, what do? We're going to just let them know. Console.WriteLine. Please type 1, 2, or 3. And then I probably should do a console.readline and wait for them to hit the press enter to continue. Something like that. So let's test that condition real quick to make sure our menuing completely works. So I'm going to type in the number 4 and hit enter, and it says please type 1, 2, or 3, and then it goes back. Okay, great. So it looks to me like the menuing system is basically there. There's just a few spots in my code where I've got these little stubbed out areas that remind me I have to do something important here. This was just so I could copy and paste console.WriteLine a bunch of times without having to keep typing it, although as you see I did. You'll notice I use WriteLine with an empty string to make some spaces for myself. Also, I'm saving off the readline values for some of these values using this. I'm defining the value and setting it all in one line of code. And I think everything else should be pretty self-explanatory. Hopefully that all made sense to you. So now the fun part begins. This is where we need to actually make a connection with our SQL Server database. And remember, the first thing that we need to do is to make sure we have a using system.data.sql client. Make sure we have using system.data. Everything else, including the link, probably should have already been there. But if not, make sure that you have a using statement for all, 6 lines of code here before you continue on. All right, so I think that the next thing we need to do is focus then on display incidents by country, our little method here, and we're going to flesh this part out. So, let's go through our steps that we need to do. We need a handshake with the database. Step 2 is to specify our request. Step 3, we're going to have to define the stored proc and the parameters that we're going to pass in. And then, we're expecting to get some data back. So step 4 would be to use the data, iterate through it, display, etc. And then finally in step 5, we want to disconnect. And so sometimes it helps me as I start building my methods to think in terms of everything I'm assigning or that I need to do. It's kind of like a checklist in my own mind of what I need to do to make this all work, so I can remind myself where I'm at. I do when I'm thinking correctly, I try to give myself a nice roadmap. It also gives then a roadmap for people who come after me to see what my thought process was. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We know that we're going to have to create a SQL connection, and then once we connect to the database, open up that connection, we're going to need to create a command, and then we're going to need to pass define parameters and pass values to it. So let's go ahead and start that process. need to create a new SQL connection. We'll just call it my connection equals new SQL connection. And we're going to go ahead and pass in the connection string. And I have, I memorized parts of this, and then other parts I'm going to have to refer to some notes I have. So based on the previous videos that we worked on. Let's go ahead and make this capital just because I'm paranoid. All right, and then assuming we got that right, and we're just going to have to test it to make sure we get it right, we'll open up the connection. And then here at the very bottom, we're going to go .close. All right, so then let's go ahead and specify our request. And to do that, what object are we going to need? SQL command, right? Okay, so here we go. And we're also going to create a SQL data reader because we need to create that self-addressed stamped envelope that I keep talking about. All right, so now that we have a command and a reader, we need to fill up the command. So my command dot command text, and we're going to give it the name of the stored procedure, which is get incidents by country. And my command dot command type equals command type dot stored procedure. Okay, and now things are going to get a little tricky for me here. My command dot parameters dot add new SQL parameter. See how I'm doing a method call within a method call, or I'm creating a new instance of SQL parameter within a method call. There's a bunch of different ways we could go about this. I'm not sure how I presented it previously. I personally think this is the easiest way to do this all in one line of code. You might see examples that show you different ways, but this is my favorite. So here's country code. And now let's go my data reader equals my command dot execute data reader, I believe is what we want, or just execute reader rather, sorry. Just execute reader, there we go. All right, so that pretty much completes step 3 for us. Now we should have a data reader with a connection to the database, a fire hose of data flowing out of our data reader that we can spray onto the screen. Okay, like that analogy? So I'm going to loop through it. So while my data reader dot read, and what do we want to do? I think we're just going to, try to duplicate what we had on screen there. So console dot write line, and I think we did something like this: agent, and then we did my data reader, and here we have to use this syntax. Instead of using the strongly typed, we're using a weakly typed array element syntax, and I'm not crazy about it, but it's probably easier right now. I think less can go wrong if we take this approach. At least I hope. Okay, so all I'm really printing out at the moment here is just the agent's name. So I think it's 2 would be the first name, 3 would be the last name, and then what did they investigate. But we could pull back, column 0 and 1 if we wanted to. So we're skipping, if my memory serves me correctly, we are going to skip incident ID and country. I guess we could test that theory real quick. And I think we're good to go here, actually, to test this part out. So I'm going to run this and see what we get. 1, and then I'm going to type in US. And yeah, we get it right. First and last name, and then what they investigated. Great. So that part works. We did it. Awesome. Now let's exit out. Nice. This is coming together. We really just have one more piece to do here, and then we're done. All right, so we're going to have to do pretty much the same thing here. We're going to duplicate step 1, because we're still going to handshake with the database to add a new incident. We're going to have to specify our request. We're going to have to define the stored procedure and the input parameters, and that's probably the part that's going to take us the longest because there's going to be a lot of typing involved. We're going to, I don't think we're going to need to use the data so much. We're really just going to attempt to save it. So let's paste that in here. But really what we're doing is that. And then finally, we're going to disconnect. Okay, so, you know, quite honestly, and I wouldn't recommend this because I think there's a better way to manage your connections to the database throughout your entire application, but for the sake of cleanness and just being really easy about it right now, I'm just going to copy and paste that first chunk. And then the next part is I'm going to have to specify our request, or rather just create a command and a data reader. I don't even know if I need a data reader. I don't think I do. Let's just specify the request like so. All right, but this is the part where really we're going to have to start doing some typing. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment and just start typing. All right, so incident ID, as we collected it from our console.readline, comes in as a string. That's the only thing we can get with console.readline. So I'm going to have to convert it to the proper data type to pass into the stored procedure. Now, I happen to know that a tiny int in SQL Server is a byte in C# and .NET. So that's why I'm doing a byte.parse, and then I'm going to take the incident ID in a string and parse that out, and that should work. Now ideally what would happen here is, you know, do some data validation. So make sure that what the person has typed in is 2 characters and that it's a correct country code. Make sure that they only typed in 1 through 99. Make sure that they only typed in 1 through 4, that it's a numeric value and that it's within that boundary. I avoided all that step. You know what would be a great idea for you? If you went off and built that part and then try to break it and see what happens. Try to put in the letter A instead of 4. Try to put in the number 1075 instead of 1 through 100. Okay? And then respond appropriately and let the user correct their mistake and continue on. So I'm not going to demonstrate how to do that, though. I don't have enough time. We need to get places. And so we're going to do the same thing with the agent ID. We know that to be an integer in our SQL Server database. Well, that happens to correspond to integer within the C#.NET framework. And we're just going to pass in datetime.now for the incident date. So hopefully that will work. Now it doesn't like that. And I'm still missing. There we go. That seemed to work. Okay, so then finally what we need to do is this. Now this will tell us how many rows were affected. Remember when we right-clicked on this and we selected execute? It gave us some meta information back in the results that told us whether we were successful or not, how many rows were affected, and then how many rows were returned. When we did the insert, no rows were returned, but one row was affected. So we can use that to double check and make sure. And I like to do this step because I think it makes it well polished. It gives the user some feedback as to whether the save was successful or not, and if it wasn't, then they need to know that. They can't just continue on their day because you've got potential problems here, and you might need to stop down and fix them. So I'm just going to give back a series of. So if one row was affected, which is what we would hope, then we want to give some feedback that the incident was recorded successfully. If not, then I want to say problem recording incident. All right, so a little bit of feedback there. And then I think that's pretty much it. Let's disconnect from our database here. Whoops. Connection. See, I'm glad I did this because I would have forgotten to do this. I was so excited about the business rules again that I forgot to clean up my connection to the database. All right, so let's go ahead and run this and see if the number 2 works. All right, so the country code, let's create another US. We'll create agent 2, incident ID of 2, and it says it recorded successfully. So let's see, in the US, we have a Sandy McGee investigated insurgency. So let's go back here and see if that was right. Let's look at agent ID, show table data. I'm looking for number 2. It was indeed Sandy McGee. And I'm looking for incident type number 2 and insurgency. And that seemed to have recorded the data correctly. So I think I am finished with the exercise for today. Now, admittedly, I'll bet you that the hardest part about this was the menuing system. Once you figured that part out, you could pretty much copy a lot of what we did previously, but it was good for you to get your hands dirty inside the code and to force you to write stored procedures, to create a connection command, parameter collection, new SQL parameters, execute into a data reader, rip through a data reader and pull out data and display it on screen. That was a valuable exercise. And you know what? That's not unlike what I've done for the majority of my career, quite honestly. Creating what are called forms over data, not a console application, but a Windows form like we did earlier today, and displaying data on screen. And it's the same basic steps. The way you display it, you just don't use a console.write line. You bind it up some other way using properties of controls that are on a given form. Outside of that, though, that's pretty much it. All right, so big day for day 8. I know this is extra long, and I apologize for that, but it was an important day, and I hope you took the time to really look at everything that we did, think about it. This should impact you now from this point going forward. You know how to write real applications. All right, so the UI isn't that great. You're only writing console applications, but don't get discouraged by that because I assure you that the easy and the fun part is writing or creating the forms and designing all that part up. it's easy compared to getting in your mind logic and how to access the database and pull back results. And so we're going to continue on that theme for the next couple of days. We'll get to Silverlight, to ASP.NET, to WinForms, to WPF. Again, that's not the hard stuff. This is, and you need to get your mind around it sooner than later. Okay, enough lecture. You did great. We'll see you tomorrow in tomorrow's videos. Thank you.